Alright, so welcome back everybody. So for this video, I'm going to show you guys how to play Ice, Flows, and Foes. This game is very similar to Kabuto Sumo. So it's going to be a very fun, enjoyable game. If you like Kabuto Sumo, you will probably like this. So one of the cool things about this game is you can play with up to 6 players, which is awesome because this is a much bigger arena or bigger board than Kabuto Sumo is. Now, the goal of the game is to knock off these fishing boats and to knock off these hunters, which are the green wooden pieces here, or meeples, okay? So you want to knock these guys off or these guys off. The goal of the game and the theme of the game is we want to protect these whales here, and we want to protect these seals here, which is kind of hard to tell that they're seals, but yes, they're seals, okay? In fact, that's a little easier to tell that they're seals. So, yes, the idea is you want to protect them. You don't want to knock them off the board, but you want to knock off these hunters and these fishing boats. The player who scores 5 points immediately wins the game. In order to score points, you just have to knock off either a fishing boat or a hunter. If you knock off a fishing boat on your turn, that's a point. If you knock off a hunter on your turn, that's a point. So basically, any combination of the hunters and fishing boats, once you have 5, you win the game immediately, which is awesome. Now, on your turn, what you're going to do is you're going to slide in a piece, just like in Kabuto Sumo, slide in a piece onto the board. Now, if you're the first player, you only get to slide 2 of these pieces, okay? Only 2. But then after that, player 2, player 3, and so on, they will get to push 1, 2, and 3 of these on their turn. So lots of chances to maybe knock some pieces out, getting to push 3 pieces. They can choose any piece they want, okay, to put onto the board. They can choose any one. Now, what are the disadvantages to accidentally knocking off a whale or knocking off one of these seals? Well, let's say it's your turn and you push a piece onto the board and it's your first ice floe that you're pushing onto the board and you knock out one of the whales or one of the seals. Well, your turn immediately ends and that's all you get. So it's almost like a missed opportunity, a wasted turn if you do accidentally knock something over. That's also another problem. Let's say it is the first ice floe that you're pushing onto the board, and you knock over a seal or a hunter, but you also knock over a whale. Okay, I mean, if you knock over a fishing boat or a hunter, but you also knock over a whale or a seal in addition to that, you're not going to get the boat, you're not going to get the hunter either for points, because your turn immediately ends, and all the stuff you would have gotten at the same time, you also don't get. So that's another disadvantage to knocking off a whale or a seal. Not only does it end your turn immediately, but it ends any potential points you might have received if they had fallen at the time of pushing this one ice floe onto the board. So that's the other problem. So yes, you don't want to knock off the seals and you don't want to knock off the whales. Now, what's really cool is while you'll be collecting the boats and the hunters for points, you'll just grab them and have them for a personal supply to know how many you have, so you know how close you are to winning the game. But there are extra ice floes that aren't on the board that have seals on them. So if you and you're allowed to push these onto the board. So you can actually choose one of these to push onto the board, and that's fine. And then after your turn is done, after the piece that has a seal on it is pushed onto the board and your turn is completely done, then what you're going to do is then you get to add one of these seal meeples to that piece. So you can't simply like put one of these onto the board and then put this at the same time and then maybe somehow knock that over right then and there for a free point. No, that you can't do that. Your turn would immediately end. So if you wanted to do one of these on your turn, this would probably be, you'd want to do this first, so that way you don't give your opponents an easy chance of knocking it off later. So there is some risk, but But as less pieces become available on the board, you might want to move some of these onto the board here, because if there's no more fishing boats or hunters left on the board, the game immediately ends. And so while you always have access to a few of these ice floes with the seals on them, when you knock over one of the ones with hunters on them, okay, well, you'll notice the iceberg has a picture of a hunter on the ice floe. That means the ice floe will be taken out, and you will keep this piece to indicate that you've obtained it and you've gotten a point. But this ice floe will become available for another player to push this ice floe back onto the board, and then after their turn is done, they would put another one of these onto the board. Because you see, here's the thing, while there are hunters already on the board, we have access to more hunters. So the idea is to add some more, especially if you're playing a 6-player game where you want to try to win the game, and it seems like there's less possibilities of getting points because most of the fishing boats and most of the hunters have already been knocked off. Well, there is a way to at least, bring some hunters back into the game, so to speak, to try to, win that way, potentially, possibly. Also, when a player is going to choose a direction, they are allowed to choose any direction they want to push onto the board. But when they push their piece onto the board, it must go all the way in. And then once it goes all the way in, it can't be pushed any further. So just like in Kabuto Sumo, once it gets to a certain point, it's going to stop at the edge. And that means you can no longer push it in at that point. So that's kind of the idea, right? Something like that. Once it's like that, you can't push it any further. See how it's going further? That wouldn't be allowed. So this would be about my stopping point here. Okay, unless I had another piece on my turn that I was pushing in, for instance. But yes, that's the idea. That's what you want to do, and that's what you're allowed to do, but you're not allowed to, like I said, to push it further, and you're not allowed to retract it. So like you might start slightly pushing it forward, and you might see some pieces that you don't want to fall off the board and be like, ooh, let's retract that and change my mind. That's not allowed either. So once you've chosen a spot, you have to stick with it. So that's just how it is. Also, these ice floes, while there is a supply that you have access to, and you can choose them, which ones you're going to do, before it's your turn. So while another player is going and pushing these pieces onto the board, while they're doing it, you must first decide before it's your turn to pick which 3 pieces you're going to push onto the board. So you have to plan in advance as well. And sometimes you might be grabbing ice floes that don't perfectly work for the situation because of shape and stuff. So there is some things that you will have to do first. There has to be a certain time period. There has to be at least one turn before your turn completely before they have to have these already grabbed before your turn can be taken. So that's the thing. These all have to be chosen before your first turn, before your next turn. So basically, when your turn is over, you should be grabbing 3 more to take after your turn is done. So that way everyone else goes, they take their turn, and then by the time it's your turn, the pieces that you thought might have been great might not be great, but that's the point. So there is some things you have to do in a certain order. But that's the general idea of how you play the game. Now, while you can push 3 icebergs at most at a time onto your turn, 3 ice floes, these arrows in the middle here, they start up in that center area in the setup. But if they get pushed off the board, then you are allowed to push them as a free iceberg to push into. So if they fall off the board, you're allowed to take 1 or 2 or whatever that happens to have fallen out and use it on your turn, and it does not count towards your 3 ice flow limit. So if you had one of these arrow ones, you could potentially push 4 icebergs or 4 ice flows onto the board on your turn. But basically, like I said, it's the first person who manages to get 5 points that wins the game. And if, like I said, all of these fishing boats or hunters are not on the board, the game immediately ends, and it's the player who has the most points that wins. And that's how you play Ice Floes and Foes. I hope this video was helpful. And if you guys like Kabuto Sumo, you'll probably like this one too. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.